Hello, everyone. This is the 79th episode of the Soccernostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles, and I'm joined by Paul from Circulo in England. For this episode, we continue our interview series with Mr. Esteban Bekerman as we discuss Argentina during the 1930 World Cup. Mr. Bekerman is an Argentine football historian and journalist, professor at the Circulo de Periodistas, Deportivas y en Taller de Investigacion, Historia, sobre, Futbol, Circle of Sports Journalists, and the Historical Research Workshop on Football. He is also the founder of entretiempos.com.ar, Center of Football Culture that includes production of magazines, books, workshops, and consulting events. We aim to have this series of interviews with Mr. Bekerman where we will examine the history of Argentina football. Welcome back, Esteban.
Hi, thank you, Shahan. Always a pleasure to be with you and Paul.
Thank you for joining us again, Esteban. Last time we finished the decade of the 1920s with the 1928 Olympics. What was the state of Argentinian football in this year of 1930?
Well, by the time Argentina football was about to make a big turn on, because it was about to enter a full professionalism era, a new era, when the salaries of the players and the big amounts involved into transference would be at open air or totally legitimated. But that wasn't happening already by the time the World Cup was played at Montevideo. So it was a time with much confrontations between the players and the boards, and a time with some riots also, and also a strike of players, which was really not just one strike, but two. One first in Rosario and other later in Buenos Aires. That first strike in Rosario had to do a lot with Argentina's team confirmation for the World Cup, because it was the key to understand why Argentina went to Montevideo without any single player from Rosario.
This was the year of the inaugural World Cup. What were the expectations ahead of the tournament? Was there a feeling that perhaps everything was set up for Uruguay to win on home soil?
Yeah, and the feeling was present at that time, but also Argentina's team was receiving good credit from the press and the people here. But, well, it had also some problems, the confirmation of the team, as I suggested in the first answer. And that also lead to think that Argentina's team was not really a fully Argentinian team, because it lacked almost any presence from players of the interior of the provinces here. All the players that went or that was called to play in Montevideo were from Buenos Aires. And the press of the big cities of the provinces was really mad at it. It was really protesting and saying that the board that took the decisions that conformed the national team was really mistaken or had a really bad feeling about the interior people, making accusations also of racism, even of some criterion of not having in count that Argentina doesn't end in Buenos Aires.
How did these events affect Argentina's preparations, and can you describe those preparations ahead of this World Cup?
Well, the preparations were really not good. it was not a good preparation. You asked me about how Argentina prepared here in Buenos Aires first. Here, it was just 2 or 3 matches of preparation, no more. And it really didn't serve a lot to see how the players could play and or who could be the best players to call for making a good team. And well, I could make a chronology of how it was prepared, the Argentinian team. It was a great work of investigation. I got really passionate about it because I had to see in the press that a lot of things that happened weren't almost forgotten here. And no one in the last almost, I think in the last 18 years was really telling anything about it. It was like buried by the time, all the troubles that we had and all the accusations I told you about, racism and that criterion of only calling players from Buenos Aires. So I set up this chronology and could see here how really the problems of making a good team for a World Cup in Argentina come from the very first beginning of the tournament. So I confirmed with this that always in each World Cup and in every World Cup, almost the Argentina's first enemy was always its very own board of members of the AFA, the Argentine Football Association. So they didn't play for Argentina as they should have. So it's enormous, the kind or the number of mistakes they made in conforming the team, a good team. But they make all things bad. Even the choosing of the hotel in Montevideo, it was in a place where you couldn't train well, and the hotel had only one shower for all the players. Well, it was really a bad place to wait for a first order football confrontation as a World Cup. And the players had to train in the streets because of it, had to run and make physical exercises in the very streets of Montevideo that surrounded the hotel. They didn't have a pitch to train, if you know what I mean. They didn't have a single football stadium to prepare themselves well.
At least it was only a short journey, though. We should remember that the European nations, of course, were at sea for several weeks on their way to this World Cup.
Yeah, but in the case of Argentina, this is really unforgivable, I think. It's really a huge mistake from the board. They should have choose another place to make the players be more comfortable and to make them train in a good place.
Since the Olympics, Argentina had lost a key player in Raimundo Orsi to Italian football, who would, like many others, become an Italian oriundi. How significant was this loss?
Well, it was significant, but this could have been resolved with calling Segundo Luna, a player from Santiago del Estero, who was the Orsi first choose to be replaced in the Olympics in Netherlands. So I really don't understand why they didn't call Segundo Luna, who was really a good player. They call instead Mario Evaristo, who was a discreet player from Boca. And, well, he, I think, couldn't play as well as Orsi in Montevideo. But Segundo Luna could have played really well, and he wasn't even called in the first list of players who were having in count for the board to be chosen, because they did this list. Not they, but the coach or the people, the person who was hired to choose who was an ex-player, Francisco Lazar, made a list first list with 3 players on each position for the members of the board to choose who they think were the best to call for the World Cup. And Segundo Luna wasn't even appearing in the first list of Olazar. I don't understand really why, but he could have been a really good replacement for Orsi.
And can you talk about Argentina's managers, Francisco Olazar and Juan Jose Tramutola?
Olazar, as I said, almost did not anything more than to prepare the list of the 3 players for the board members to choose the 2 definite ones to be called for Montevideo. He, in Montevideo, really was doing a lot. He almost was like watching matches and talking with the board members, but not much, not more. And Tramutola was a physical trainer, no more than that. He was the person who was always with the players, like saying them what to do or what to not do, trying to keep them concentrated in the match and the next matches, and keeping a good physical form, but not really a coach on tactics and anything. The tactics conversation were not existing almost at that time here in Argentina, and in that team, all the players were who could sometimes talk about how to play against each rival. And the most hard to understand thing, I think, about how the team was prepared is it's that just a few days before the starting of the World Cup, here the board members of the AFA decided that it would be them who would choose the players for each match here from Buenos Aires, not being completely at Montevideo. They decided that the election of the team would be just a result of them, because in Netherlands, in the Olympics of 1928, they said that the coaches and the delegates that were there didn't choose well the players for each match. So it would be them here from Buenos Aires who would choose the players for a match. And that's really crazy. I think they were not even in Montevideo to see how the players were, how the physical condition of the players were, and how the state of personality of each player were. So it's really almost impossible to understand, but it happened.
So there was really no manager or coach actually with the team in Uruguay?
Yeah, it was Olazar, but he almost had only the charge of or the nomination to be something like a coach, not more than that.
Let's go through Argentina's final squad for the 1930 World Cup. For goalkeepers, you have Ángel Bocio of Talleres Remedios de Escalada and Juan Botasso of Argentino de Quilmes. For defenders, you have Jose de la Torre of Racing Club, Juan Evaristo of Barracas, Ramon Orlando Mutis of Boca Juniors, Rodolfo Orlandini of Club Social y Sportivo Buenos Aires, Fernando Paternoster of Racing Club.
Juan Evaristo was from Sportivo Palermo, right?
In fact, I was going to say, before I read these, the source for the player's registration is from El Gráfico Historia de Selección, and some other sources have the club registrations might differ. So if I call out any mistake, please go ahead and correct me like you just did. So okay. Fernando Paternoster of Racing Club, Natalio Perinetti of Racing Club, Adolfo Zumelzu of Barracas, Alberto...
No, also Palermo, also Sportivo Palermo.
Oh, Palermo, okay. So Alberto Chibidini of Central Norte Tucumán, Edmundo Piaggio of Lanús, Pedro Suarez of Boca Juniors, So we come to midfielders. Roberto Eugenio Chero of Boca Juniors. Luisito Monti, who we will discuss many occasions this time at San Lorenzo. Alejandro Scopelli of Estudiantes. Now we come to strikers. Atilio De Maria of Estudiantil Porteño. Mario Evaristo of Boca Juniors. Captain of the team, Manuel Ferreira of Estudiantes. Carlos Puzel of Club Social y Sportivo Buenos Aires. Carlos Spadaro of Lanús. Guillermo Stabil of Huracán. And Francisco Varallo of Gimnasia y Esgrima La Plata. And just to remind everyone that Angel Bocio, Paternoster, Juan Evaristo, Zumelzu, Orlandini, Perinetti, Ferreira, Chero, and Luisito Monti were also present in the 1928 Olympics.
Let me disagree first with the classification of midfielders that you use for free players, because at that time there wasn't any midfielders here or even worldwide, because football as it first was played, it had only defenders and attackers, and that's how the players were called by the press. No one talked about midfielders. No one used that word here, at least since the very first beginnings of the sport here until the decade of 1950, 1960 even. So Chero was a left insider who was playing at Boca, and really he was like a really great playmaker and also a good striker. He made a lot of goals. He could, shoot very well and also had a very good head for making goals with the head. So he was known as Golden Head by the press, or that was a surname they gave to him. But there are really just two players who could be classified now as midfielders are Zumelzu and Monti, who were the center halves, because the other players had to do just one thing in the team, which was or to defend or to attack according to the position they had to fulfill.
So let's get to the World Cup. Argentina started its World Cup on July 15th at Montevideo at Estadio Gran Parque Central, facing France. For this match, there's some highlights. Monti injured Lucien Laurent as early as the second minute, and Laurent was confined to the wing for the rest of the match. De La Torre and Pedro Suarez earned their first cap for Argentina. It is said that Argentina dominated in the early going, but then the match was balanced out. The French goalkeeper, Alex Tepo, was impressive before being injured himself in the 23rd minute, but still played on for the rest of the match. We must remember there were no substitutions at the time. Monti scored a winner off a free kick in the 81st minute. Towards the end of the match, when the French were attacking and appeared to have a chance to score, the Brazilian referee, Gilberto de Almeida Rego, blew the final whistle, and there was about 6 minutes remaining. There was a lot of protests, and police on horseback had to intervene to keep the calm, and at some point even spectators were on the field. The Uruguay fans, who naturally would have been against Argentina, protested this decision, and the Argentine players had already returned to the locker rooms, and they had to be persuaded to get back on the field. Varado allegedly threw a temper tantrum and rolled in the grass, and finally the remaining minutes were played. Argentina held on to the win, but the Uruguayan crowd supported France, and they were shouting Francia, Francia. At the end of the match, they carried some of the French players on their shoulders. The Argentine delegation almost left the World Cup in anger because of this incident.
Yeah, the attack of Argentina failed almost all the match. That's why the goal had to be made by Monchi, by a midfielder, as we talked just in the last answer. Well, it was really a big failure of the attack, and it was clear that wasn't the best shape the attack could have for the World Cup. And that was already clear in that last preparation match the players played here in Buenos Aires before going to Montevideo. So it's really difficult or hard to understand why the attack still was conformed with that players. But well, the good thing about those Uruguayans shouting and accusations or insults to Argentinian player was that Chero told at the finish of the match to the board members that he wasn't gonna play anymore in the World Cup. He said that he was really affected by those insults, and he decided that the best for the team, it would be that he was make apart from the team. He was totally left out. So Chero released himself for playing the next matches, and that was the key to make Stabile, who was called as a substitute for the titular or the very first choice as center forward, who was Ferreira, to enter the team. Stabile could enter the team thanks to that Chero's decision. That's why Stabile appeared playing just the second match and not the first. And Stabile turned out to be the scorer of the World Cup, thanks to that Chero's decision of making himself out from the competition. So that insults from the people who were seeing the match really were at last a good thing for the confirmation of the Argentinian team. And Ferreira, as a left insider, played so well at that point that he, in the rest of his career, he never played as a center forward again. He just from that World Cup was only a left insider in Estudiantes de La Plata, in River, and well, in the rest of his career. He was a really key figure in Argentinian team, but as a left insider, he played better than as a center forward. And well, it was really a good thing, as you can see, that the people of Uruguay, and into that crowd was some Uruguayan players, because the Argentinian players said that they couldn't understand why a colleague could be so furious on them, or insulting them as they did. Especially Héctor Escarone was identified as one of those Uruguayan players who were cheering against Argentina and making all kind of shoutings and accusations of being lambs and being cowards and other stuff.
The next match was against Mexico on July 19th. The match that included 4 or 5 penalty kicks, according to some other sources. For this match, Argentina's captain Manuel Ferreira had to return to Buenos Aires to take his bar exam. So he would be back for the next match. For this match at Montevideo's Estadio Centenario, that was a match where, like you said, Guillermo Stabil started and he scored a hat-trick in the 8th, 17th, and 80th minute. Adolfo Zumelzu scored in the 12th and 55th minute, and Francisco Varallo in the 53rd minute. And Mexico responded through Manuel Rosas in the 42nd minute, a penalty kick, 65th minute, and also through Roberto Gayon in the 75th minute. In fact, Rosas became the first player to score in a penalty kick in a World Cup when he scored in the 42nd minute. And Paternoster for Argentina, he missed a penalty kick. He could have been the first player to score in a penalty kick, but he missed his penalty kick in the 23rd minute. Like you said, the introduction of Stabil was beneficial, and that set their World Cup on track. this win.
Yeah. You could see that just in the very first match, Stabile played as one of the players selected for the first team or the starting team. So he really played very well, and only as a striker, because he wasn't more than that. He was just a striker. He said always that as a player, he didn't know how to play football. he claimed to be a player who played in the top level without knowing about playing really good football, and that he just learned to do that when he was in Europe later. But here in Argentina, he was just a very good striker with some good ability to make defenders out or to be in the area of the rival and to define the plays of his companions. He couldn't participate in the making of that plays or of that goals he did. He just was there to make the final touches or to be able to speed, to run with a great speed. He had a great speed also, and that's why he was called the filtrator. He was filtering always between the defenders and to have a good choice in front of the goal. Argentina beat Mexico with no really difficulty, no? So Stabile helped a lot to it.
Argentina's final match in the group was on July 22nd against Chile. For this match, Manuel Ferreira was back in the lineup, captaining the side. Argentina would win this match 3-1. Again, the match took place at Estadio Centenario at Montevideo. Stabile scored twice in the 12th and 13th minute, and Mario Evaristo scored in the 51st minute. And Guillermo Arellano replied for Chile in the 15th minute. Besides Stabile's continuing scoring streak, the other thing to mention was that a brawl between the players took place just before halftime. And apparently, Luisito Monti had instigated the fight, and the police had to intervene to handle the situation. That's 3 matches, 3 wins for Argentina.
Yeah, in that match, the most important thing I think that happened was that Baracho got really injured because of a kick of a Chilean player. He received a kick from behind from a Chilean player. I don't remember who. I think Subiabre was the one who kicked him from behind. And because of that injury, Baracho couldn't play some match later, and he really should have played the final. But well, the poor members always made mistakes, and well, they choose Baracho even when he couldn't have played because of that injury.
Now we come to the semifinals. On July 26th, Argentina faced the United States. This would be a heavy win for Argentina, 6-1, but it was also a very ill-tempered match. Luisito Monti would score for Argentina 28th minute. Scopelli would score in the 76th minute. Stabile scored twice in the 69th and 86th minute, and Pucel in the 80th and the 85th minute. And the United States reply was from the grandfather of our mutual friend, James Brown, in the 89th minute. In fact, speaking of Mr. Brown, decades later, he complained of the handling of this match from the referee, John Longenus, the Belgian, who would also referee the final. According to Mr. Brown, Longenus allowed the Argentines to kick them all over the field. We have to mention that USA's Ralph Tracy's leg was broken as early as the 10th minute, and the Americans had to play with one less man for the rest of the match. And the American goalkeeper, Jim Douglas, was also injured. Also, the American Andy Ald played with a rag in his mouth as he was kicked by an Argentinian in the mouth. Mr. Brown also claimed that the Argentinian left back kept throwing mud in his face.
I think that was anticipating how the World Cup would be in some years later, no? Like in Chile in 1962, or well, in a lot of battles that came later. But yes, it was really like a hunting of the United States player. And well, Monty was the very first one who were kicking all rivals. He was always like trying to injure the players of the United States team. And he did, like with all those you mentioned. Well, Monty, because of that, was later threatened by the locals when he was about to play the final. And well, he was like marked as a really violent player by the press in Montevideo. And well, the locals, the public from Uruguay took a really good note about it for making him to be accomplished or to be like self-conscious about that. If he was gonna be so violent with Uruguay, he would gonna pay for it. So I think, yes, it was really a very violent match that you could say with no doubt at all.
We come to the final on July 30th, and it's a replay of the 1988 Olympics final, and it's once again Uruguay and Argentina. For the day of the match, many Argentinians arrived by coming across the River Plate. The Uruguay police, they feared violence and searched them at the docks for guns and confiscated any weapons found. We come to the match itself. This is the Argentinian lineup: Juan Botasso, Jose de la Torre, Fernando Paternoster, Juan Evaristo, Luisito Monti, Pedro Suarez, Carlos Pucel, Francisco Baracho, Guillermo Stabil, Mario Evaristo, and the captain Manuel Ferreira. Uruguay would take the lead in the 12th minute through Pablo Dorado, but Argentina would quickly reply back through Carlos Pucel in the 20th minute, and Guillermo Stabil would give Argentina the lead in the 37th minute. So they go into the first half break with the lead. However, in the second half, Uruguay would come back and would score 3 unanswered goals. Pedro Sea scored in the 57th minute, Santos Iriarte in the 68th minute, and Hector Castro in the 89th minute. Just like the 1928 Olympics, Uruguay would be World Cup champions in their centenary year. It has to be said that at the final whistle, the Argentinian players were very sportsmanlike and applauded the Uruguayans. Stabil would be the top goal scorer with 8 goals. Something worthy of note is that Argentina played with 5 different lineups in each match, and only De La Torre played in every match, which goes to confirm what you said, that they were being managed from long distance, basically.
Yeah, it was just 2 days before the match that the board members here in Buenos Aires decided how would the team be conformed. And Monty didn't want to play, as you know, because of the threats he received in form of a letter and other kind of threatening gestures from the locals. And well, that decision of the board members to call Monty to play was almost the very first of a lot of bad decisions who they took for that final match, because they also sent a member of the board who was the president of San Lorenzo, Pedro Bilgain, who was also a really important politic here at the time. and to convince Monty to play because they wanted Monty. But in the papers here at the morning of that match, it said that it was not Monty who would gonna be included on the team, but Chibidini, who was not really a center half, but a right half or a left half, according the team who were playing. But Chibidini could have played a lot better than Monty because Chibidini, I think, would not have been frightened as Monty by any threat or any gesture or any shouting from Uruguayans because Chibidini was really more used to be playing with a lot of locals cheering against him because he played in the interior. He was the only one player who was not from Buenos Aires. And he, before the World Cup, played in Tucumán, in Salta, and in other places of the country where the stadiums have not really good accommodations for the people. And so he received a lot of threats and a lot of shouting, and he played well despite of it. So he could have played a lot better than Monty. And also you have the fact that Chibidini lost a son just a few months before the World Cup. So he would have not been scared to be murdered by the Uruguayans like Monty. Monty confessed he was really frightened by those threats against him and his family. He said that in 1980 in an article and in an interview that they made with him in the Clarín newspaper. Pablo Shonto was the journalist who could find Monty and make him said that he was really frightened. He just said that I was frightened by the threats I received. So Monty did not play that much, really. Like Baracho said a lot of years later also, an Uruguayan felt to the field and Monty was there to help him to be on again. So it was really like having a one player less also for Argentina in that match to have included Monty. And a very big mistake from the board to convince Monty to play after nominating Chibidini to play instead of him.
Ahead of this final, much has been made of the insistence of both teams on playing with their own ball. The Belgian referee Langenus had to make a compromise of playing with each respective team's ball in each half. Why was such an issue not discussed and resolved ahead of the match?
I don't know. I really don't know. But I think could be a legend more than a real thing. That I would try to check that well before saying it. It's said, it has been said a lot about it, but I couldn't really check that with sources from that time. So I would be careful about saying that was really what happened. But well, could have happened, and that I can call as influential into that match, really. I think it's not that important.
And what was the reaction, the final back in Argentina? As referenced earlier, was there a feeling that favourable conditions had been set up on and off the field for the home nation?
Yeah, here we had at the time a magazine called La Cancha, the field, who was really annoyed and was making great accusations against the Uruguayan people and the Uruguayan board and all the Uruguayan they could accuse of anything. So they were really like decided to incarnate like the voice of the Argentinians who were really annoyed by those threats and those cheerings. They called to break any relation with Uruguay, not only at the football field, but also in politics and everything. And well, the AFA decided to break relations with Uruguay. And so that's why just in 1932, again, was a match between Argentina and Uruguay. Argentina decided to be set apart of any confrontation with Uruguay. Well, the La Cancha magazine also accused its rival El Gráfico, the very well-known magazine of sports here, to be a magazine, an Uruguayan magazine that is published here in Argentina, because the founder of El Gráfico, Constancio Vigil, was Uruguayan. And because El Gráfico was not saying anything about the violence of the players and the people in Uruguay. So they were really using that for making accusations and to, well, in a way to compete with El Gráfico with accusations against them also.
I believe there were also protests in front of the Uruguayan embassy that required the police to break up. Is that the case as well?
Yeah.
To circle back to Luisito Monti, there's a quote that's been attributed to him. Apparently, he said that in 1930, he was threatened to lose the match. And in 1934, by now he was an Italian Oriundi, he was threatened to win the match. Is this a true statement?
Yeah, I heard about it. And it's really easy that he could have been said that because that's what really happened. In 1934, he was friended by Mussolini himself, like all the Italian members of the team, to win or die, you know?
The Belgian referee, Jean Langenus, apparently he said that he did hear rumors that the Argentine players were threatened. Years later, Carlos Pucel disclosed that the anonymous threats against Monti were somewhat directed at the life of the player's mother. Pucel was convinced that had the match taken at Buenos Aires, they would have won. Monti was reported to have said, not wanting to play like you mentioned, he said, "You play, I do not go." And he was finally convinced, like I said, by the several team leaders. Some of the Argentines had threatened they would walk off if any incident happened during the match. Monti himself also blamed the refereeing that he believed had favored the home team. So he definitely was threatened based on many different sources.
Yeah, and he confessed he was threatened and he was frightened by those threats. So it's nothing to check more about that. I think that confession he did in 1980, 15 years later of the match, resolves the mystery of Monti and the way he played in the final.
Shortly afterwards, on September the 6th, 1930, Argentina's president, Hipólito Yrigoyen, was deposed in a coup. Was this in any way related to pessimism resulting from the loss in the World Cup final, or was it a completely unrelated event?
No, it was completely unrelated. I think it had nothing to do with Argentinians' defeat. And even if Argentina was world champions, I think he would have been defeated also.
So let's take the opportunity to discuss some of the players in this World Cup. It's like Scopelli, Pucel, Ferreira, De Maria, the Evaristo brothers, Stabil, Monti, and Varallo. What can I say about Scopelli? He also became an Oriundi when he joined Roma, like many of the other Argentines.
Yeah, he played for Italy. And then he later came back to Argentina and also played again for Argentina.
Other things to mention is that Carlos Pucel, he became the first ever substitute to score a goal for the national team. In 1934, he came on as a substitute against Uruguay and scored a winning goal. Getting back to the captain, Manuel Ferreira, who missed the match to take the bar exam. He was nicknamed Piloto Olímpico.
Yeah.
What's the reason for that?
Well, the reason is the way he played, because at the moment in Argentina, the center forwards were all like pilots of the attacks. They were who ran the way the attack were about to play, or he were really not only strikers or filtradores like Stabile. He were most like organizers of or playmakers, and they played from a very long distance to the goal, because till 1925, as you know, the offside rule said that you had to have 3 defenders between the attacker and the goal line, not 2, like after 1925. So that's why, for not being trapped by the defenders in the offside trap, they tried to play like the most delayed attackers on the field. They play as a vortex, the most delayed vortex in attack, with the form of a pyramid or like abanico. I don't know how to say it in English. It's like
a curve.
Well, a curve. Yeah. Just that. This was the way all the attacks played here in Argentina in the 20s, and in the late 20s, it started to change. That started to change because of or as a result of the introduction of the new rule about the offside. The center forwards were losing the fear of getting trapped in the offside position. So here it started to appear some players like Stabile or Bernabé Ferreira, who were more strikers than organizers of the play, of the game. So Ferreira also, who was really an organizer, felt himself more comfortable since that time as a playmaker and as a left insider than as a center forward, because he was not really playing as a classic center forward since his very beginning.
Others like Attilio De Maria would also join the Italian Serie A and he joined Inter in 1931, becoming Oriundi, and in fact he was a part of the 1934 World Cup winning side.
Yeah.
Juan and Mario Evaristo are the only pair of brothers to have represented Argentina in the World Cup finals. Guillermo Stabile, as you mentioned, was nicknamed El Filtradore. He joined the Italian side Genoa after the World Cup, and he would also later manage the national team from like 1939 to 1950 and also 1960. So he managed Argentina like 6 Copa Americas in the 40s and 1950s.
Yeah. After he learned how to play, and after he learned how to transmit how to play to his companions and his players, no?
The other thing about him is that for decades, he was thought to have been the first scorer of a hat-trick in the World Cup after his hat-trick against Mexico. But in November 2006, it was discovered that United States Bert Patenaude was recognized for his hat-trick against Paraguay 2 days earlier.
Yeah.
Going back to Monti, we already mentioned that he became an Oriundi and part of the 1934 World Cup winning Italian side. He became the first ever player to play in 2 consecutive World Cup finals with 2 different nations. Finally, Francisco Varallo, he was the last ever survivor of this first World Cup. He lived until the age of 100, and he passed away in 2010.
Yeah, and he was really in a good health till his death for people of 100 years, no? He really was always remembering, and he was really in a good state of mind to remember and making jokes about what happened, and also to let people know how angry he was about that final and the board decisions, that really bad decisions that lead to Argentina's defeat as the one of making Monchi play. No, that was really a very bad decision.
We've seen how many of these players moved to Italian football. Were the multiple departures to Italy the reason why Argentina chose to send essentially a B team to the 1934 World Cup?
No, well, that's really not related to the decision of Argentina sending a team with no really good local players or with no the best local players, because at the time Argentinian football was again divided into two associations. The league formed by the big clubs here decided to not interrupt their championship all the time that took the World Cup and the trip. They prefer to have the players here playing and not to send them to represent well the Argentinian football. And so the other association took the invitation of the Italian Federation and accepted and sent the players they could send, which were not really the best at all of Argentinian football.
What was the aftermath of this World Cup for Argentine football as a whole?
Well, this really didn't had a great consequence in Argentinian local football, but it was clear by that time that Argentinian football was evolving into a professional stage, into a new era of money much more involved in all the aspects of the football practice and the relations between players and clubs. So it really left clear that for a good management of the players and the teams had to transparent that was already happening in Argentinian football. Now, all the players were receiving money at the time, and all the players were playing not just because of the love of the sport and the team, but for gaining money and making a really good business. So it was clear that to content the players and to not lose all the players who were playing good at the time, you had to give them money because otherwise they would be going to Italy and other places. So the finals just let them know to the board that they had a really good internationally qualified team and good players. And if they didn't rush in approving the professionalism, they would lose many more players. I think that's the very most important consequence. Now that they should have noticed that they would lose many players if they were not facing things and approving professionalism.
So in a way, was this World Cup a reference point where, at least at the international level, some stagnation set in because of some stagnation because of the departures, because they did not perform well in a World Cup for many decades after this?
It was a lot of other reasons that took Argentina to be left apart. And, well, Argentina's relation with FIFA was always really conflicted. In 1938, Argentina was not going to participate, but finally the board decided to participate and the FIFA didn't let them. So it was really an amount of many reasons that the ones that can explain why Argentina just was playing again a World Cup in 1958. There are lots of it.
And just like we ended the 1920s podcast, was this 1930 World Cup further confirmation that at that time Uruguay and Argentina were the two best teams in the world?
Yeah, I think it was clear that the best football of the world was the one that was played here in the Rio de la Plata, no, in the Rio de la Plata River. So Argentina and Uruguay, I think, left that clear. But always you can legitimately have the doubt if in England were better teams or better players than here, because England had a very good professional league with lots of money involved in transferences. And, well, maybe it would have been good to see England in the World Cup, to see how it was in the international concert of football, no, and to see players like the ones of the Arsenal team that was winning a lot at that time, like William Drake or some like that, who were known here as really good players. So I think that's the only doubt you can have if England would have been able to beat Argentina or Uruguay.
I agree. It's a shame we'll never know.
Yes.
Well, in the future podcasts, we'll look more into the continuation of the history of Argentine football. So once again, we'd like to thank Mr. Bekerman for his participation in this series. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. For any questions and comments, you may contact me on Twitter at SP1873, and my blog, and on Facebook, I'm under Soccernostalgia. Mr. Paul Whittle can be contacted on Twitter at 1888letter, and his blog is the1888letter.com. And you may follow the podcast on Spotify and now on Google, Apple, Podvine, and Stitcher, all under Soccernostalgia Talk Podcast. Please leave a review, rate, and subscribe if you like the podcast. Mr. Bekerman can be contacted on Twitter at EGERBEK and at EntretiemposR. And all this information, his website and his blog and the Twitter handles are all listed in the blog and podcast listings. So Esteban, thank you very much, and hope to continue these discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esteban. It's very informative.